I'm Leo Vance, 32 years old, and at my own brother's wedding, my father slapped me across the face in front of 200 guests for refusing to give up my home. Before I tell you about how that single moment of impact led to the complete implosion of my family and the rise of an empire they never saw coming, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Alright, let's get into it. The sound of a slap is unmistakable. It's not like in the movies. It's a sharp, wet, cracking sound that cuts through everything else. The gentle clinking of champagne glasses, the soft hum of conversation, the distant melody of a string quartet playing some forgettable pop song. For a split second, that sound was the only thing that existed in the universe. Then came the silence. A heavy, suffocating silence as 200 pairs of eyes turned to stare. My cheek was on fire, a throbbing, white-hot blaze that spread from my jaw to my temple. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the cold, dead stillness that settled in my chest. "Give Ethan and Chloe your penthouse," my mother, Margaret, had hissed just moments before, her voice a venomous whisper that belied her perfectly coiffed hair and elegant evening gown. Her fingers dug into my arm like talons. My father, Robert, stood beside her, a mountain of a man in a tailored suit, his face flushed with anger and entitlement. "It's the right thing to do, Leo. They're starting a family. You're single. You don't need all that space." I looked past them at my younger brother, Ethan, the groom. He was sitting at the head table with his new bride, Chloe. He caught my eye and gave a small, smug smirk before turning his attention back to his wife, as if this whole humiliating scene was just background noise to his perfect day. That smirk did something to me. It snapped a cord of obligation that had been wrapped around my neck for 32 years. "No," I said. My voice was quiet, but it felt like a cannon blast in the silent room. "The answer is no." My father's face contorted. "What did you say to me?" he growled, stepping closer. The smell of expensive scotch was heavy on his breath. "I said no," I repeated, looking him directly in the eye. "It's my home. I worked for it. It's not yours to give away." And that's when it happened. His hand came up so fast I barely had time to register it. The crack echoed through the ballroom. My head snapped to the side. A woman gasped somewhere in the crowd. I slowly turned my head back, the fire on my cheek now a dull, angry pulse. I looked at my father's furious face, my mother's anxious, yet complicit expression, and my brother's distant, triumphant smile. In that one crystal-clear moment, I saw them for who they truly were. Not family. They were pirates, and I was the ship they'd been plundering my entire life. A strange sense of calm washed over me. I leaned in close to my father, so close that only he and my mother could hear me. I smiled, a real, genuine smile, and whispered the 7 words that would change everything. "You just lost me." Then, I straightened my suit jacket, turned my back on them, and walked out of that wedding reception without a single look back. The silence held until the heavy ballroom doors swung shut behind me, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was walking into a war. I didn't go home, not right away. The penthouse, my sanctuary, would feel tainted by the conversation I'd just had. Instead, I drove through the sleeping city, the streetlights blurring into long streaks of orange and white. My cheeks still throbbed, a physical reminder of the invisible bruises they'd been leaving on me for years. I ended up at a 24-hour coffee shop, a little place called The Daily Grind, run by a quiet, kind man named David. He saw me walk in, saw my face, and simply nodded towards a booth in the back before bringing over a black coffee without me having to ask. As I sat there, the steam from the mug warming my cold hands, my mind drifted back. Not to the slap, but to everything that came before it. The penthouse wasn't just a collection of rooms with a great view. It was a monument to a decade of my life. I bought it when I was 30, after 6 years of relentless, soul-crushing work. While other people my age were backpacking through Europe, going to music festivals, or just enjoying their weekends, I was coding. I was a software engineer, and I was good at it. Good enough to pick up freelance projects on top of my demanding full-time job. My life from age 24 to 30 was a blur of 60, sometimes 70-hour workweeks. I lived in a tiny, cramped apartment with a window that looked out onto a brick wall. My diet consisted of instant noodles and cheap takeout. Vacations were a foreign concept. Holidays like Christmas and Thanksgiving were just extra days to bill clients. I remember one New Year's Eve, I watched the ball drop on a tiny, lagging stream on my second monitor while debugging a critical error for a client in a different time zone. My celebration was a fist pump of relief when the code finally compiled at 12:07 a.m. I had a goal, a singular, burning ambition, to own a place that was mine. A place no one could take from me. A place that proved, if only to myself, that I had made it on my own terms. I saved every penny. I didn't buy new clothes. I drove a beat-up 10-year-old sedan. I poured all my extra income into investments, learning the market, making my money work for me while I slept for the few hours I allowed myself. My parents saw my ambition not as something to be proud of, but as a strange, misguided obsession. You should be investing in a future with a nice girl, not in concrete and glass. My father would say dismissively whenever I mentioned my savings goals. When I finally took them to see the Penthouse after I'd closed the deal, their reaction was lukewarm at best. I was bursting with pride, showing them the floor-to-ceiling windows, the state-of-the-art kitchen, the balcony that overlooked the entire city. My mother just wrinkled her nose. It's so modern. A bit cold, don't you think? It doesn't feel like a family home. My father clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that was meant to seem supportive but felt condescending. Well, son, you've got yourself a nice little bachelor pad. Just don't get too comfortable being alone up here. They never once asked how many hours I'd worked. They never asked what I'd sacrificed. To them, my success was an abstract thing, something that had just happened. It was an asset, and as I was learning tonight, it was an asset they believed they had a right to control. Sitting in that quiet coffee shop, I finally understood. They didn't see the sweat, the sacrifice, the years of my life baked into the very foundation of that building. They just saw a prize, and they had just tried to hand it over to their real prize, my brother Ethan. My coffee grew cold as my thoughts shifted from my own struggles to my brother, Ethan, the golden child. It's a cliché, I know, but in my family it was the gospel truth. From the moment he was born, 2 years after me, Ethan could do no wrong. While I was quiet and studious, he was charming and reckless, and my parents adored him for it. My earliest memories are a highlight reel of this disparity. When I was 10, I saved up for months to buy a second-hand telescope. I spent hours in the backyard, mapping constellations. Ethan, who was 8, got bored one afternoon and pushed it over, cracking the main lens. When I ran crying to my dad, he just ruffled Ethan's hair and said, "Boys will be boys, Leo. It was an accident." Then he told me I should have been more careful with my things. He never made Ethan apologize, and he never offered to help replace it. When we were teenagers, I worked a grueling summer job bagging groceries to save up for a cheap car. The day I bought it, a rusty but reliable sedan, I felt like I was on top of the world. A month later, Ethan, who had just gotten his license, begged my parents for a car of his own. They co-signed a loan for a brand new sports coupe he couldn't possibly afford. He totaled it within 6 months, street racing with his friends. Did they make him get a job to pay for it? Of course not. They paid off the loan and told him he was lucky to be alive. My grocery bagging savings suddenly seemed pathetic in comparison. This pattern continued into adulthood, but the stakes got higher. Ethan had a string of brilliant business ideas, or so he claimed. There was the gourmet food truck that never sold a single taco because he spent all the startup money on a custom paint job. There was the subscription box for dog toys, which failed after he forgot to cancel the auto-renew on the inventory and ended up with a garage full of squeaky rubber chickens. There was the app that was going to revolutionize social media, which never got past a poorly designed landing page. Each time, he'd come to our parents with a sob story, and each time, they'd open their checkbook. They drained a significant portion of their retirement savings to bail him out, time and time again. "He just needs a little support," my mother would say. "He has so much potential." Meanwhile, I was putting myself through college, working 3 different jobs, and graduating with honors. When I asked for a small loan to help with a down payment on my first tiny apartment, my father told me it was important to learn financial responsibility and stand on my own 2 feet. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. Ethan lived rent-free in a condo my parents owned downtown. He drove a car they paid for. His credit card bills magically disappeared every month. And through it all, he developed a deep-seated resentment for me. My success wasn't an inspiration to him. It was a personal insult. He saw my penthouse not as something I had earned, but as something I was hoarding, something that should have been his by birthright. And Chloe, his new wife, was cut from the same cloth. I'd seen the way she looked at my home, her eyes scanning the furniture, the art, the view. It was the look of someone window shopping. The slap at the wedding. It wasn't just about a penthouse. It was the culmination of a lifetime of this. It was my father, in one swift motion, declaring that my 32 years of hard work, responsibility, and success meant less than his 30-year-old son's latest whim. The message was clear. My purpose was to produce. Ethan's purpose was to receive. I was just the workhorse. He was the heir. The first hint of dawn was streaking the sky purple and orange by the time I finally left the coffee shop. David just gave me a solemn nod as I walked out, a silent promise of solidarity. Driving home, a plan, cold and sharp, began to form in my mind. It wasn't a plan for revenge, not exactly. It was a plan for severance. A surgical removal of a cancer that had been poisoning my life for 3 decades. When I stepped into my penthouse, the silence was a comfort. The floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city slowly waking up below. This was my fortress, my sanctuary, and I would defend it to the last. I didn't sleep. Instead, I made a fresh pot of coffee and sat at my large dining table, turning it into a war room. I opened my laptop and started digging. I needed information. I needed leverage. The attack came sooner than I expected. Around 9 a.m., my intercom buzzed. It was the front desk. "Mr. Vance? Your parents are here to see you. They say it's an emergency." "There's no emergency, Bill," I said calmly into the receiver. "Don't send them up." "I'm sorry, sir, but they've already gotten on the resident elevator. Your father was very insistent." Of course, he was. Rules were for other people. I disconnected the call and walked to my front door. My heart a steady, cold drum in my chest. A few moments later, there was an insistent pounding on the door. Not a knock. Pounding. I took a deep breath and opened it. There they stood, my father, Robert, and my mother, Margaret. They looked terrible. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed. Whether from tears or lack of sleep, I couldn't tell. My father's face was a mask of thunderous rage. He tried to push past me into the apartment. "We need to talk." I didn't move. I stood firm in the doorway, blocking his path. "I believe we said everything that needed to be said last night." "Don't be a damn fool, Leo," he snarled. "You embarrassed this family. You made a scene. You owe your brother an apology." "I owe him nothing," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "You're the one who assaulted me in front of 200 people. I'm the one who should be calling the police." That stopped him for a second. My mother stepped forward, her hand fluttering at her chest in a gesture of practiced fragility. "Leo, please, don't say such things. Your father was just upset. He loves you. We all do. We just want what's best for Ethan." "What's best for Ethan is for him to grow up and start providing for himself," I shot back. "And what's best for me is for you to get out of my hallway." Robert's face went from red to purple. He took a step forward, his hand raising again as if by instinct. "You listen to me, you ungrateful little—" "I wouldn't do that if I were you," I said, my eyes flicking up to the small, discreet dome of the security camera in the ceiling of the hallway. These elevators and hallways are monitored 24/7. High-definition video and audio. I'm sure the building management would be very interested in a recording of one of their residents being threatened by his own father. The venue for the wedding last night? I made a call this morning. Funny thing about high-end places like that. They have cameras everywhere. especially in the banquet halls. The color drained from his face. My mother gasped. They had operated in a world where their power was absolute, where consequences were for other people. The idea that their actions could be recorded, documented, and used against them had clearly never crossed their minds. I saw the flicker of defeat in his eyes, quickly replaced by a new, more calculating kind of anger. He lowered his hand. "This isn't over," he seethed. "Oh, I know," I said, a cold smile touching my lips. "We're just getting started." I closed the door gently in their faces, the soft click of the lock sounding like the first move in a chess game. The storm had arrived, and for the first time in my life I was ready for it. The moment the door was locked, the adrenaline hit me. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was the electrifying hum of a battle begun. My parents' playbook was simple: intimidation, emotional manipulation, and brute force. My playbook would be different. It would be precise, strategic, and utterly devastating. My first call wasn't to the police. It was to my lawyer. Sarah Myers wasn't just any lawyer. She was a shark in a designer suit, a woman who specialized in complex financial litigation and messy family disputes. I had hired her a few years back to help me set up my own consulting firm, and her sharp, no-nonsense attitude had impressed me. "Leo," she answered, her voice crisp and professional. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you. Everything all right with the quarterly filings?" "Everything's fine with the company, Sarah," I said, pacing my living room. "But I have a personal matter. A big one." I spent the next 20 minutes laying it all out. The years of financial disparity, the constant bailouts for Ethan, the demand for my penthouse, and finally, the slap. I left nothing out. Throughout my story, Sarah was silent, letting me speak without interruption. When I finished, the only sound was the faint hum of my refrigerator. "Well," she said, her voice devoid of emotion, "that's quite a situation. First things first, are you physically okay?" "I'm fine. A bruised cheek and a shattered ego. But I'll live." "Good," she said. "The ego will heal. Now let's talk strategy. They have no legal claim to your property. None. The penthouse is in your name, purchased with your funds. Their demand is legally irrelevant. The assault, however, is a different story. You have a witness pool of 200 people and likely a video recording. We could press charges. It would be messy, but you would win." "I don't want to send my father to jail," I said, surprising myself. "I just want them out of my life. I want to build a wall so high they can never climb over it again." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in her brilliant mind. "A wall," she mused. "I like that. Walls aren't built with anger, Leo. They're built with leverage. Right now, your leverage is the assault charge. It's a powerful card to hold, but it's a one-time play. We need something more. Something permanent." "What are you thinking?" I asked. "I'm thinking about their finances," she said, her voice taking on an excited edge. "You mentioned they've bailed your brother out of multiple failed businesses. That tells me there's a paper trail. You also said they live well beyond the means of a typical retiree. Where is the money coming from? People who act with this level of entitlement often get sloppy. They believe they're untouchable." She continued, "Your father threatened you this morning. That shows desperation. Why are they so desperate to get you out of your penthouse and put Ethan in it? Is it just about giving their favorite son a nice place to live? Or is there something else at play? They're treating your property like it's a family asset, like it's part of some future inheritance they think they can control now." Her words hit me like a lightning bolt. I had been so focused on the emotional betrayal that I hadn't considered the cold, hard numbers. "Start digging, Leo," Sarah commanded. "You're a tech guy. You know how to find things. Look into Ethan's failed companies. Look into your father's business dealings. Any public records, any digital footprints. I'll start the process on my end, looking into their property records and known assets. We're not looking for dirt. We're looking for the truth. And my gut tells me the truth is going to be our best weapon." After hanging up, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Sarah had given me a direction. This wasn't just about defending my home anymore. It was about dismantling the entire corrupt system my family had built. I went back to my computer, my fingers flying across the keyboard. The hunt was on. My first target was Ethan. His digital life was a mess of vanity and carelessness, just like his real life. His social media was filled with pictures of him on boats, at expensive restaurants, and wearing designer clothes, all funded by my parents. But I wasn't interested in his lifestyle. I was interested in his failures. I started with his most recent venture, a cryptocurrency platform called Oryx. It had crashed and burned within a year, but not before he'd sunk a significant amount of my parents' money into it. He'd bragged about building the entire thing from the ground up, calling himself the next tech genius. I always knew that was a lie. Ethan couldn't code his way out of a paper bag. I remembered him mentioning storing his project files on an old cloud server service that was known for its lax security. It was a long shot, but I figured it was worth a try. I used a few old email addresses of his that I remembered and ran them against some common password patterns he used to use. His dog's name, his birthday, password 123. It was embarrassingly easy. On the third try, I was in. The server was a digital graveyard of his failed dreams. But buried deep within a folder labeled OREX_final_build, I found what I was looking for. The source code. My blood ran cold as I scrolled through the files. It was like looking in a mirror. The variable names, the commenting style, the architectural structure, it was all mine. About 5 years ago, I had worked on a personal side project, a sophisticated trading algorithm I was developing just for fun. I had been excited about it and, in a moment of weakness, I'd shown it to Ethan, explaining the basic concepts. He had feigned interest, asked a few questions, and I, eager for a connection with my distant brother, had explained more than I should have. I'd kept the project on an old external hard drive, one that I had left at my parents' house for a few months when I was moving between apartments. He must have copied it. He hadn't just stolen the idea, he'd stolen the code itself. Line for line. He'd done a sloppy job of trying to disguise it, changing a few function names here and there, but it was undeniably my work. He had taken my intellectual property, my labor, and passed it off as his own genius. Then he'd taken my parents' money and burned it to the ground with his incompetence. The betrayal was a physical blow. It was one thing to be the disfavored son. It was another to be actively robbed by my own brother. This wasn't just about a penthouse. This was a pattern of theft and deception that had been going on for years. I meticulously downloaded every file, every log, every scrap of data from that server. I made multiple encrypted backups. This was evidence. This was leverage. But as I was about to log out, a different folder caught my eye. It was labeled V&_Consulting. V&A, Vance and Associates. That was the name of the small consulting firm my father had run before he retired. Why would Ethan have a folder related to my dad's old company on his personal server? Driven by a new, darker curiosity, I clicked on it. The folder was full of invoices, wire transfer confirmations, and spreadsheets. And what I found there made the theft of my code feel like child's play. It was the key to a much deeper, much more dangerous secret. One that implicated not just my brother, but the patriarch of the entire Vance family. The V&A_Consulting folder was a Pandora's box of financial crimes. At first, it just looked like a series of standard business documents. There were invoices from Oryx, Ethan's failed crypto company, to Vance and Associates for consulting services. But the numbers were astronomical. Tens of thousands of dollars for services described in the vaguest possible terms: market analysis, strategic development, platform integration. I knew for a fact that my father's firm had nothing to do with cryptocurrency. He had retired from the business of advising on manufacturing logistics 5 years ago. This made no sense. Why was Ethan's company, which produced nothing of value, billing our father's dormant company for massive sums of money? I started cross-referencing the dates on the invoices with my parents' known expenditures. There was a payment of $50,000 for strategic development in March of last year. I checked my mother's social media. A week later, she posted photos of the brand new luxury SUV she got for her birthday. Another invoice for $75,000 for platform integration in July corresponded almost perfectly with the down payment they made on a vacation home in the mountains. The picture was becoming sickeningly clear. This wasn't a legitimate business transaction. This was a scheme. I kept digging, my fingers flying across the keys as the sun began to set outside my window. I used the invoice numbers and transfer IDs to look for public records, anything that could connect the dots. I found that Vance and Associates wasn't entirely dormant. It was a registered LLC, and it was receiving large payments from a handful of other anonymous shell corporations. These corporations had no websites, no employees, no physical addresses. They existed only on paper, and all of them had one thing in common. They were linked to some of my father's old business contacts, men who had always operated in the gray areas of international trade. My heart pounded in my chest. This was money laundering. My father was using Ethan's fake company as a pass-through. The shell corporations would pay Vance and Associates for non-existent services. Then Vance and Associates would pay Orex for more non-existent services. The money, now cleaned, would flow into Ethan's accounts, and from there into my parents' lifestyle. It was a way for my father to access his ill-gotten gains without raising red flags with the IRS. He had turned his own son, his golden child, into a willing accomplice in a criminal enterprise. The audacity of it was breathtaking. All those years, he had preached to me about financial responsibility, about earning an honest living. He had belittled my hard-earned salary, calling it chump change compared to the world of real business. And all along, he was a crook, living off dirty money while I worked myself to the bone. Suddenly, their desperation for my penthouse made perfect, horrifying sense. It wasn't just about giving Ethan a nice place to live. It was about assets. My penthouse was a clean, legitimate, multi-million-dollar asset. If their money laundering scheme ever fell apart, if the authorities started looking too closely, their own assets, the house, the vacation home, the cars, could be seized. They needed to move their son into a secure, untouchable property that was in someone else's name. My name. They weren't trying to give my brother a home. They were trying to create a safe house for their criminal conspiracy. I felt a wave of nausea. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating the dark room. This was so much bigger than a family squabble. This was a federal crime. I now held a bomb in my hands. The question was no longer how to build a wall. The question was when and where to detonate it. For a full day, I did nothing. I just sat with the information, letting the sheer weight of it sink in. The anger was still there, a hot coal in my stomach, but it was overshadowed by a profound sense of clarity. I saw the entire chessboard, every piece, every possible move, and I finally knew exactly what I had to do. My next call was not to Sarah. It was to Jessica, a sharp and aggressive real estate agent I had worked with when I bought the penthouse. "Leo, good to hear from you," she said, her voice perpetually upbeat. "Thinking of selling? The market's on fire right now. We could get you a hell of a promotion on your initial investment." "Not selling, Jessica," I said, my voice steady. "I'm thinking of buying." "Oh? Looking for an investment property? I've got some great duplexes downtown." "I'm thinking bigger," I interrupted. "I want to buy the Hollow Shore Residences." There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. The Hollow Shore Residences was the name of my building. The entire building. A 30-story luxury high-rise in the heart of the city. "Leo, are you joking?" she finally managed to say. "I have never been more serious in my life," I replied. "I know the holding company that owns it has been quietly looking for a buyer. I want you to make them an offer on my behalf. A strong one. All cash. I want it done through a blind trust. My name is not to appear on any of the paperwork until the deal is irrevocably closed." Jessica was sputtering now. "Leo, that's a 9-figure deal. Where would you even get that kind of capital?" "I've been a very disciplined investor for a very long time, Jessica," I said, looking at the portfolio I had built in secret over the last decade. "The capital is not an issue. The discretion is. Can you handle it?" The shock in her voice was replaced by the thrill of the biggest challenge of her career. Yes, she said, her voice now firm. Yes, I can handle it. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of secret meetings, wire transfers, and legal paperwork. I liquidated a significant portion of my investment portfolio, the nest egg I had been building for my own early retirement. It was a massive gamble, but it felt right. This wasn't just a financial transaction. It was a declaration of independence. While Jessica worked her magic, I continued to live my life as if nothing had changed. I went to work. I went to the gym. I ignored the barrage of texts and voicemails from my family. They alternated between threats from my father, tearful pleas from my mother, and abusive messages from Ethan demanding money. I read them all, saved them all, and replied to none of them. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, I got the call from Jessica. "It's done," she said, her voice buzzing with excitement. "The final papers were signed an hour ago. Congratulations, Leo. You are the sole owner of the Hollow Shore residences." I hung up the phone and walked over to my window, looking down at the city lights twinkling to life. I felt a sense of power I had never known before. I was the master of my own universe. I owned the walls that surrounded me, the ground beneath my feet, and, most importantly, the roof over my brother's head. Because, in a stroke of beautiful poetic irony, I knew from my mother's incessant voicemails that after the wedding, Ethan and Chloe had signed a lease on a 2-bedroom apartment on the 10th floor of my building. They were planning to move in next week. They had wanted my home. Instead, I had become their landlord. With the deed to the building securely in the hands of my trust, it was time for the next move. This one required a more delicate touch. I texted my mother, "Meet me for coffee. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. The cafe at the art museum. Come alone." She replied almost instantly, "Oh, Leo, of course. I'm so glad you're finally ready to talk." I chose the art museum cafe for a reason. It was public, quiet, and elegant. It was a place where loud, emotional outbursts were frowned upon. She arrived looking flustered but hopeful, as if she expected me to break down and apologize. She started in with the usual script. "Your father is just worried. This whole situation has been so hard on the family. Your brother is so upset." I let her talk for a few minutes, then I held up a hand to stop her. "I'm not here to talk about feelings, Mom," I said, my voice calm and even. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a single, slim manila folder. I slid it across the table. "I'm here to talk about this." She looked at the folder, confused. "What is it?" "Open it." Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the clasp. The first page on top was a copy of an invoice from Orex to Vance and Associates for $50,000. The next page was a bank statement showing the transfer. The page after that was a printout of her own social media post, boasting about her new SUV, timestamped 1 week after the transfer. I watched as the color drained from her face. She flipped through the next few pages. More invoices, more bank records, evidence of the shell corporations, printouts of the source code Ethan had stolen from me. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with panic and disbelief. Where did you get this?" "That doesn't matter," I said coldly. "What matters is that I have it. All of it. And I have much, much more. I know everything. The shell companies, the consulting scheme, the money laundering, everything." She stared at me, speechless. The mask of the caring mother had crumbled, revealing the terrified accomplice beneath. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued, leaning forward. "You are going to go home and you are going to tell Dad and Ethan that it's over. The harassment stops. The phone calls, the texts, the unannounced visits. All of it ends today. You will never ask me for another dollar. You will never speak of my penthouse again. You will remove me from your lives, completely and permanently. In exchange, this folder and all the data I have stays with me. It does not go to the IRS. It does not go to the FBI." I leaned back. "This is not a negotiation. This is an ultimatum. You have until the end of the day to agree to my terms. If I hear from any of you, for any reason other than to confirm your acceptance, I will burn your entire world to the ground. Do you understand me?" She could only nod, her eyes filled with a terror I had never seen before. For the first time, she wasn't looking at her son. She was looking at a man who held her future, and the future of her husband, in the palm of his hand. Evidently, my mother didn't deliver the message with the level of gravity it required. Or, more likely, my father's monumental arrogance simply wouldn't allow him to believe I had the nerve to follow through. 2 days later, I received a text from him. It was a command, not a request. Family meeting. My house. Sunday at noon. Be there. I knew this was it. This was their last stand. Their final attempt to break me through sheer force of will. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to simply proceed with my plan. But another, colder part of me knew I had to go. I had to see their faces when the curtain finally came down on their pathetic little drama. I arrived at my childhood home at precisely 12:05 p.m., fashionably late. I found them all gathered in the formal living room, a room reserved for special occasions and, apparently, for familial ambushes. My father sat in his favorite oversized leather armchair like a king holding court. My mother perched nervously on the edge of the sofa. And in the corner, looking smug and triumphant, were Ethan and Chloe. My Aunt Carol, my father's sister and a notorious family gossip, was also there, likely for moral support. The air was thick with tension. My father began without any preamble. "Leo," he said, his voice booming in the quiet room. "We are going to settle this right now. You have caused this family a great deal of pain and embarrassment. Your behavior has been selfish and disrespectful." I remained standing by the door, my hands in my pockets, my expression neutral. "Has it?" I asked calmly. "You know it has," Ethan chimed in, his voice whiny. "You ruined my wedding. You're being completely unreasonable about the penthouse. Chloe and I have had to sign a lease on a smaller apartment because of you." Chloe nodded vigorously, clinging to his arm. "We just don't understand why you're being so cruel, Leo." I almost laughed. The sheer, unadulterated gall of these people was a spectacle to behold. My father pointed a thick finger at me. "Here is what you are going to do. You are going to sign a document which our lawyer is drafting as we speak, transferring the deed of the penthouse to your brother. It will be considered an early distribution of his inheritance. You will then apologize to Ethan and Chloe for the scene you caused. And then, we can begin to put this unfortunate chapter behind us." He leaned back in his chair, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. He had delivered his royal decree. He expected me to bow. The room was silent, all eyes on me. Ethan was grinning, already picturing himself hosting parties on my balcony. My mother looked relieved, believing the crisis was averted. I let the silence stretch out, enjoying the weight of their expectation. I looked from my father's arrogant face to my brother's greedy one. I saw my mother's weak compliance and my aunt's eager curiosity. This was the family I had spent my life trying to please. Slowly, I took my phone out of my pocket. I didn't say a word. I just tapped the screen a few times, my thumb hovering over the send button on a pre-written email. My father's brow furrowed. "What are you doing? Put that thing away. We're having a serious conversation." "Oh, I am being serious," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "More serious than you can possibly imagine." And with that, I pressed send. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The family exchanged confused glances, my father's face beginning to darken with renewed anger at my defiance. Then, a phone buzzed. It was Ethan's. He pulled it out of his pocket, his smug expression turning to one of confusion as he read the notification on his screen. "What the hell?" he muttered, tapping to open the email. "Notice of eviction? Dear Mr. Vance, as per the terms of your lease agreement, failure to provide proof of income and first month's rent by the specified deadline has resulted in the termination of your tenancy at Hollow Shore Residences. This has to be a mistake." Chloe snatched the phone from his hand, her face paling as she read. "What does this mean?" Before I could answer, another phone buzzed. A deep, resonant buzz from the pocket of my father's suit jacket. He pulled it out, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the screen. It was the email I had just sent. The subject line was simple, "Your ultimatum." I watched him as he read. I saw the moment his brain processed the first attachment, the Orex invoice. I saw the flicker of confusion. Then I saw his eyes widen in horror as he scrolled to the bank statements, the shell company diagrams, the damning evidence of his criminal enterprise laid bare in a single, neat digital package. His face, which had been flushed with power moments before, turned a ghastly shade of gray. His hand began to tremble, the expensive smartphone shaking as if it were about to fall. "What is this?" he whispered, his booming voice reduced to a strangled rasp. "That," I said, my voice ringing out in the silent room, "is the truth. That is the real family business. The one you've been running with your son while you preached to me about hard work." My mother started to sob, a quiet, gulping sound. Aunt Carol looked like she had just seen a ghost. Ethan and Chloe were still stuck on the eviction notice, unable to comprehend the larger disaster unfolding. "The eviction notice is real, Ethan," I said, turning my attention to my brother. "You didn't pay your deposit because you were waiting for Mom and Dad to give you the money. But the building was recently sold, and the new ownership has a very strict policy about tenants who don't pay on time." Ethan jumped to his feet. "I'll just call them and sort it out. I'll talk to the new owner." "Oh, I don't think he'll be very sympathetic," I said. My father looked up from his phone, a dawning, unspeakable horror in his eyes. He finally understood. "Who?" he choked out. "Who bought the building?" I let the question hang in the air for a moment, savoring it. I looked at each of their terrified, broken faces, and then I delivered the final, killing blow. "I did," I said calmly. "I own the building." The explosion of that one sentence was more powerful than any slap. It shattered the very foundation of their world. My father slumped back in his chair, looking like a man who had just been shot. My mother's sobs turned into frantic wails. Ethan just stood there, his mouth hanging open, the realization finally hitting him. He wasn't just being evicted. He was being evicted by the very brother he had scorned and stolen from. I had taken their greatest weapon, their entitlement, and turned it against them. They wanted a home? I owned it. They wanted power? I held all of it. They had tried to push me out, but instead, I had boxed them in completely. This was the moment that changed everything, the moment I finally took back control of my own life. Thank you for sticking with me to this point. You guys are amazing. If you could, please help me out by liking this video and commenting the number 1 down below, just so I know you made it this far with me. It not only helps more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone out there. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue sharing the rest of this journey. The days following that meeting were a blur of delicious silence. My phone, once a constant source of harassment, fell quiet. The war room in my penthouse became a living room again. The battle was over and I had won. But there were still some loose ends to tie up. The eviction process for Ethan and Chloe proceeded without a hitch. My property management company, acting on my strict, anonymous instructions, followed the letter of the law. Notices were posted, deadlines passed, and a legal eviction was scheduled. The night before they were due to be removed by the authorities, my phone lit up with a number I knew all too well. It was Ethan. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a string of texts came through. The first ones were furious. "You son of a bitch. You think this is funny? You're trying to make us homeless. Chloe is crying her eyes out. I hope you're happy." I read them without emotion. Then, as the reality of his situation must have set in, the tone shifted to desperation. "Leo, please, call me. We can work something out. I'll pay you back. Promise. Don't do this to me. We're brothers." That last text almost made me laugh. Brothers. He was only interested in being brothers when he needed something from me. I thought about what to write back. A long, angry message detailing all his betrayals? A cold, dismissive one-liner? In the end, I decided that words were unnecessary. I went into my files, found the screenshot of the stolen Orex source code, my code, and sent it to him without a single word of text. His reply came back a minute later. It was just one word. "How? I sent him another screenshot. This time, it was one of the fake invoices from Orex to Vance and Associates. A long pause. Then, the final, pathetic text message of our relationship arrived. "What do you want, Leo?" I looked at his question for a long time. What did I want? It wasn't an apology. It wasn't money. It wasn't revenge, not really. I had already achieved that. What I wanted was peace. An end to the endless cycle of taking. An end to the drama. I typed my reply. Complete separation. I then blocked his number. I blocked Chloe's. I blocked my parents. It was a digital amputation, and with each press of the button, I felt lighter. I had finally, truly, cut the cord. A week later, I was having my morning coffee at David's shop when the bell above the door jingled. I looked up and my heart skipped a beat. It was my father, but he looked different. The arrogant, powerful man who had slapped me at the wedding was gone. In his place was a stooped, tired-looking old man. His expensive suit hung on him, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He spotted me in my usual booth and hesitated for a moment before walking slowly towards me. He didn't try to intimidate. He just stood by the table, looking lost. "Can I sit down?" he asked, his voice quiet, almost hoarse. I nodded, gesturing to the seat opposite me. David shot me a concerned look from behind the counter, but I gave him a slight shake of my head. It was okay. We sat in silence for a few minutes. He just stared into the middle distance. "Your mother," he began, then stopped. He cleared his throat. "She knows. I tried to lie, to say you were bluffing, but she saw it in my eyes. She knows what I did, what I used Ethan for." He looked at me then, his eyes filled with a weary kind of despair. "She gave me a choice. Transfer the majority of our remaining legitimate assets into her name and resign from every board I sit on, or she would file for divorce and go to the authorities herself. She said she wouldn't go down with a sinking ship." I felt a flicker of something, not pity, but perhaps a grim understanding. My mother, for all her weakness, was a survivor. She had chosen her side. "I was wrong, Leo," he said, the words sounding foreign and rusty coming from his lips. About a lot of things. I was so focused on making sure Ethan was taken care of, I broke everything else. It wasn't the grand, heartfelt apology a son might dream of, but it was more than I ever expected to get from him. It was a confession of defeat. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table. It was a birthday card for my mother. "She's turning 60 next month. She's having a small dinner. We'd like it if you came." It was an olive branch, a tiny, fragile one, offered from a position of complete and utter weakness. I didn't say if I would go. I just picked up the envelope. "Goodbye, Dad," I said. He nodded slowly, pushed himself up from the table, and walked out of the coffee shop, a ghost of the man he once was. The Vance dynasty was officially over. A few months passed. Life settled into a new, peaceful rhythm. The silence from my family was a constant, welcome presence. I threw myself into my work, both at my day job, where I received a significant promotion and a raise, and in my new role as a property mogul. Managing Hollow Shore residences was a challenge, but a rewarding one. It was a tangible empire, built not on lies, but on logic and hard work. When my mother's 60th birthday arrived, I found myself standing in front of my closet, the invitation in my hand. A part of me wanted to throw it away, to honor my demand for complete separation. But another part was curious. I wanted to see the new landscape of my family with my own eyes. I wasn't going for them. I was going for me. I arrived late. The dinner was at a private room in an upscale restaurant. When I walked in, the conversation died down. There were only a dozen people there, my parents, Aunt Carol, and a few of their close friends. Ethan and Chloe were conspicuously absent. I later learned they had moved in with Chloe's parents in a different state, thoroughly defeated. My mother rushed over to greet me, her smile strained. "Leo, you came. Happy birthday, Mom," I said, handing her a gift. It was a generic, expensive scarf. Polite gesture, nothing more. My father sat at the head of the table, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. He just nodded at me, a silent acknowledgement. The dinner was one of the most awkward experiences of my life. The conversation was stilted, full of conversational landmines that everyone was trying desperately to avoid. No one asked me about my work. No one asked me about the penthouse. No one mentioned Ethan. It was as if the last few months had never happened. But the most profound change was in how they treated me. There were no demands, no passive-aggressive comments, no backhanded compliments. Aunt Carol, who used to pepper me with questions about my love life and my salary, barely looked me in the eye. My parents spoke to me with a careful, hesitant respect. It was the respect born of fear. They knew I held the power now. The evidence I possessed was a loaded gun I had promised not to fire, but they knew it was always there, in my back pocket. Their comfort and freedom depended on my silence. I didn't stay long. After the cake was cut, I stood up to leave. "You're going already?" my mother asked, her voice tinged with disappointment. "I have an early morning," I said. It was a lie, but it was an easy out. This time, no one tried to stop me. No one guilt-tripped me. My father simply said, "Drive safe, son." As I walked out of the restaurant into the cool night air, I felt a profound sense of freedom. I had not reconciled with them. I had not forgiven them, but I had neutralized them. I could exist in the same room as them without being consumed by their drama. The invisible chains were finally broken. I was an independent nation, and they were a neighboring country with whom I shared a tense but stable border. And that was more than enough. A few weeks after that dinner, I decided to throw a party of my own. Not a stuffy family gathering, but a real celebration. It was a housewarming for the penthouse I had fought so hard to keep, a christening of my new life. The guest list was small but meaningful. There was David, the coffee shop owner, who had been a quiet pillar of support through the whole ordeal. There was Sarah Myers, my brilliant lawyer, who had helped me sharpen my anger into a legal weapon. And there was Jessica, the realtor who had moved mountains to make the building acquisition a reality. These were the people who had stood in my corner, my chosen family. The atmosphere was the polar opposite of my brother's wedding. There was no tension, no pretense, just laughter, good music, and genuine friendship. We gathered on the balcony. The entire city spread out before us like a carpet of glittering jewels. David, who rarely said more than a few words at a time, raised his glass. "I've seen you come into my shop at all hours for years, Leo," he said, his voice warm. "I've seen you exhausted, stressed, but always determined. I've never seen you look as peaceful as you do right now." "To peace. To peace," we all echoed. Sarah clinked her glass against mine. "You know," she said with a wry smile, "in all my years handling messy family cases, fights over the funeral arrangements, battles for custody of the kids, squabbles over the family college fund, I have never seen a situation so thoroughly and completely won. You didn't just win the battle. You changed the entire map." Jessica laughed. "She's right. Most people in your shoes would have just sold the place and moved on. You decided to buy the whole damn neighborhood. It's legendary." I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. They tried to take away my four walls. It seemed only fair to buy all of theirs. The conversation flowed easily, filled with stories and jokes. As I looked at the faces of my friends, illuminated by the city lights, I realized what this was all about. It was never just about the property. The penthouse was a symbol of my independence, and my family's attempt to take it was their final, desperate effort to deny me that independence. Their plan had backfired spectacularly. In trying to cage me, they had forced me to become more powerful than they could have ever imagined. They had wanted to take away my home, and in doing so, they had shown me how to build a real one. Not with steel and glass, but with loyalty, respect, and trust. Later in the evening, as the party wound down, David came over and clapped me on the shoulder. He looked out at the skyline, then back at me. He raised his glass one last time. "To Leo," he said, his voice filled with sincere admiration. "The man who turned a slap into an empire." And looking out at the endless city lights from my balcony, from my home, I knew he was right. I was free. It's been over a year now since that fateful wedding. My life is quiet, and I mean that in the best possible way. The peace I fought for is real and lasting. I still own Hollow Shore Residences, and it's become a thriving business. A testament to what can be built when you focus your energy on creating instead of fighting. My contact with my parents is minimal, almost non-existent. I receive a polite, generic card on my birthday and at Christmas. I send one back. There are no phone calls, no visits. We are like strangers who share a complicated past. I heard through the grapevine that my father is a shell of his former self, a man stripped of his power and pride. My mother maintains her social standing, but those who know them well can see the cracks in the facade. They got what they deserved, a life sentence of quiet irrelevance. As for Ethan, I haven't heard a word. I have no idea where he is or what he's doing, and I feel no desire to find out. Our brotherhood was a one-sided contract that I finally declared null and void. Sometimes, late at night, I stand on my balcony and look out at the city. I think about how close I came to giving in, to just handing over the keys to my life to appease them. The old me, the boy who craved his father's approval, would have done it. But the man who walked out of that wedding reception was someone new. The slap was meant to put me in my place, to remind me that I was lesser. But it did the exact opposite. It was a wake-up call. It was the violent, shocking act that finally severed the chains of guilt and obligation that had bound me for my entire life. They thought they were taking away my home, a structure of concrete and glass. But what they really did was give me the key to my own cage. They forced me to see that my sanctuary wasn't the penthouse itself, but the strength within me to build it, to earn it, and, when the time came, to defend it. They wanted to take my walls away, but instead, they forced me to tear down the prison walls I had let them build around my own soul. And for that, in a strange, ironic way, I will always be grateful. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. It's a strange and difficult journey when you realize the people who are supposed to be your biggest supporters are actually your biggest obstacles. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between your own well-being and the unreasonable demands of your family? I'd be honored to read your experiences. Please share your story in the comments below, and if you haven't already, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Take care.